you all for being here. It's really exciting, and it's an important time. And I just, again, I want to thank all the remarkable authors of this book. They are the ones that win this award. And Suzanne, you mentioned the foreword. Jesper Broden, the CEO of IKEA, and Hala Tomasdottir, the CEO of the B Team, they wrote a beautiful foreword. And if you don't read anything else in the book, I urge you to take a look at that foreword. So one of the things that they say here is we are in a critical decade, maybe the most important one for humankind. History will remember us for the actions we take or fail to take. The clock is ticking. Future generations are counting on us, and history has its eyes on us. Again, when they were writing that, while we were doing the book, I had my first three grandchildren were born during the 2 years of research and work on this book. And I just had 5 weeks with them a couple months ago. And it was just like, I just have to say, I question the kind of world, what are they going to see in 2040? And I looked into their eyes and I made a promise that we're going to make the next decade and a half count, and count affirmatively. And every part of my energy is going to go in thinking about the kind of world that we're going to be handing off to them. So we started the 2020s, as you know, when we started the book. Everything was in motion, unprecedented disruption. We had mega fires and mega floods and hurricanes. We had the global pandemic and millions of deaths. We had economic collapse and, the questions of the workplace of the future. And then George Floyd, we had the cries from George Floyd, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And the cries for justice and social inclusion and equality all over the world. And then obviously we're living in the threats to democracy, and so and now with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the specter of unthinkable things and war and more. So it's an amazing time while we started writing this book. Deloitte did a millennial survey and called it Generation Disrupted. Greta Thunberg was mobilizing 7 million students around the world, Fridays for the Future. A couple months ago, on the upper right, I was with Muhammad Yunus, and Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner for microenterprise, and he said, some words that were chilling to me. He said, this is the decade of last chance. And so, these voices, Paul Pullman, on the lower right-hand side, I'll come back to Paul. He's an amazing leader, head of Unilever for many years, and now honorary chair of the International Chamber of Commerce, and I'll come back to his leadership. The new survey in the Lancet in 2022 survey of people 16 to 25 in 10 countries found that 75%, a large majority, are frightened by our future. More than half of the young people said humanity was doomed. 40% of the young people, and this also sent chills, are hesitant about having children. And so, they asked, some of them say, if nature is this unmoored today, why even have children and bring them into the future? So again, this intergenerational view, and these voices are scarcely alone. They're emerging everywhere. So in the business world, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, they managed $8.5 trillion in assets. And he said, we are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance. We're calling on all companies to show how their business model will be compatible with net zero by 2050. And, but, you know, in this financial industry, he could have been speaking for every industry. You know, it's not just a fundamental shaping of finance. It's every industry that we're in the process of reinventing the agricultural industry, reinventing manufacturing to circular, reinventing. We're literally in this mode of the largest change project we've ever in our lifetimes have seen in human history. In bioscience, 14,000 scientists signed this journal article, refereed journal article, and they basically just put it out there. We're asking for a transformative change for humanity. So I mentioned Paul Pullman. He wrote one of the chapters in our book, and I found this particular quote quite interesting. He said, "What we're whispering," he said, "these aren't trends. These aren't trends anymore. These are trajectories, full-blown trajectories. What we're witnessing is a shift that's all-embracing. It's rapid and irreversible, extending to the farthest corners of the planet, and it's involving practically every aspect of business life. What we're witnessing is a world increasingly divided by companies that are seen as part of the problem and those that are leading the solution revolution in this era of massive mobilization. What we're witnessing is the birth of a comprehensive new enterprise logic, what Peter Drucker would call a new theory of business, essentially. And what is the theory of business? So how fast is this moving? So we've got just some headlines from the recent past. The Glasgow Financial Alliance, it's an alliance for net zero. It aligns 160 asset managers. They represent over $130 trillion, and they're committed to making this transition in terms of the scientific targets of a 1.5 degrees centigrade world. Green investments to reach 50 trillion by 2025. ESG linked funds see an 10x rise in such a short period of time. One that I love is this plan by Mark Jacobson and colleagues, scientists from engineers from all over the world. And they've published several papers on how we can be the first, how we can, they have roadmaps for 100% renewable energy created, actual roadmaps for 139 countries. And today, 90% of all the new electricity and capacity is solar and wind. An organization called RE100 quickly built on Mark Jacobson's Scientific American article and started to build a coalition of companies going 100% renewable energy, Apple, Atlassian, Ørsted, Estee Lauder, Tesla, and so on. So I think one of the greatest stories of our lives is just beginning. And we're going to see, I think, more change in the next 4 years as it relates to all of this than the last 40. We have been sleepwalking around the climate action and the social justice agenda related to it. So I love this quote by Rudy Dornbush, the macroeconomist. He says, things take longer than you think they will, and then they happen much faster than you thought they could. And I think that's what's happening. In this book, we have a framework that we developed that pulls together all of the logics across all the chapters. And I want to share with you all of this. Three, I can't cover everything, but I want to hit on three core ideas. The first is about mission economies and mission economics. The second is the shift from sustainability, doing less harm, to the call for full spectrum flourishing. Just eliminating unsustainability isn't enough. It's not motivating, it's not inspiring, just less, less, less. And then I want to define with an external view define what we mean by positive institutions, and the combination of outperformance on the left-hand side and out behavior, that is the behavior in the world, on the right-hand side. And in the middle, I want to cover the concept of mirror flourishing, one of the most remarkable findings in our science and research and some PhD dissertations. So anyway, my story and our story, the book story, covers it in the book, was a call. It shocked me. It was beyond our capabilities in so many ways. I was humbled by it. But our specialization, one of the specializations that I've written about, is called appreciative inquiry. It's a method for bringing whole systems into the room, 300 stakeholders, 1,000 stakeholders for 3 days to start planning and designing. And it's not talking heads or pre-negotiated agreements. It's collective designing and planning based on the positive psychology of human strengths. Well, with the spread of that, Kofi Annan called, this was early in the big debates about business and society, and Enron had happened and WorldCom, and so he wanted to host a meeting, and it became the largest meeting in the history of the UN between CEOs and the United Nations. And we got a call at the Weatherhead School of Management, and we brought master's students and doctoral students to help facilitate. It was an amazing experience. I was just glad that I could speak after he opened up the session. But again, it wasn't going to be a session with talking heads and pre-negotiated agreements. It was going to be a session of interactive and collaborative planning and designing. And the other thing I wanted to mention about that moment in history, it was the first time that the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations was filled not by nation state leaders and presidents and prime ministers, but for the first time it was filled by CEOs. And it was just an incredible privilege to be part of that. That meeting went so well, and it was the first meeting leader summit of the United Nations Global Compact. The next one happened 3 years later when Ban Ki-moon took over, and I could see the trends turning into trajectories at that moment. On the lower left, I was sitting at the table with some of these great people. Jeffrey Sachs is on the lower left, and Jeffrey, had documented so clearly how we can be the first generation in all of human history to completely eradicate extreme grinding poverty, the kind of poverty that most of us can scarcely imagine. But he was pounding the table. He was saying, what an amazing time to be alive in the field of management, in the field of leadership, in the field of business. Jane Nelson, head of the Kennedy School at Harvard for corporate citizenship, and she too was saying the kinds of things we're going to see in our lifetime. She shared studies from, the University of Vienna, for example, where you can spray on solar cells onto windows, and every big building and every place where there's windows can turn into a power source. And that's, and she said, what we're going to see in these next 30 years is unbelievable. Jennifer Decker, the chief financial officer at a local company called Fairmont Minerals, what we're starting to see is that the chief financial officers were starting to lead a lot of these efforts. She was one of the best leaders I'd ever worked with, and their corporation, within a couple years of working on this, became the #1 corporate citizen in America. And then Ratan Tata, he spoke again in Switzerland, and he was sharing the sentiment of many CEOs. It is time for all of us as CEOs. So many solutions and technical and so on are out there. It is time for all of us to stand up, to step up, and to scale up. And so that was our start. And, after that meeting in Switzerland, I did think about it. It is not utopian to think about these once in a civilization type trajectories that we're going to be part of. That our schools are going to be part of, and our corporations. We can eradicate extreme grinding poverty. The data is there on the movement towards a renewable, abundant, clean energy, and how much costs are going to be saved in healthcare and so on. So anyway, I love, I think at a time where there's so much turbulence, there is also a call for hope. And I love the economist and ecologist David Orr's definition of hope. He said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And that's where I feel like it's just been such a privilege to work in this area. So after that work with Kofi Annan, we created at our Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And it's not an answer, it's a search, business as a force for peace in high conflict zones, business as a force for eradicating extreme poverty, business as a force for dignified work, business as a force for this massive transition. And you can visit our website that Megan Booker and others have been nurturing for the last few years. But we have over 3,000 stories in that database. And that helped us with the research for this book. And the way it happens is students in business schools all over the world and management schools, they download our interview guide and go into their regions in all parts of the world and look for the most radical, not incremental, the most inclusive and positive and scalable innovations in business and society. So that will help in terms of when I get into some of the models. So the first idea that we looked at carefully in this book was this whole idea. We were influenced by Mariana Mazzucato. Mariana is one of the world's leading economists today. She's from Italy. She's now in the UK at the University in London. And she has a 3-volume set that I recommend that people read. She looked at when are economies most dynamic, when are economies, most dynamic and alive. And she looked at 100, different times in nations all over the world where the economic dynamism was at a whole different level. Her archetype was Kennedy's moonshot era. And she talked about the moonshot moment and all of the tri-sectoral kind of investment in government, private sector, civil society sector coming together. And what she argues is that when there is something like that kind of moonshot moment for a whole society, that's when we're in innovation's frontier. That's when unpredictable spin-offs of innovations like the internet and so many things were born during the Apollo mission. It's a time, she argues, that people overcome their polarizations, where there is reunion, a new reunion, collaboration, a new hope. And it's a time for societies where action is the antidote to despair. And the number one, she started using the word for our current moment, and she talked about this Earthshot moment and how, with the 17 global goals like gender equality, ending poverty, and so on. So the 17 global goals, plus the Paris Agreement and the scientific targets, she argues that this is emerging as the largest collective action project in the history of humankind. We've come together from time to time, like in 1984, when the World Health Assembly declared smallpox was eradicated. It was the first time we've ever collaborated across all cultures and nations and did the job. 1984, the World Health Assembly declared smallpox was eradicated. But today's Earthshot moment and time frame for speed and scale it makes that look so small now. So right now, what's emerging is this idea of mission economics and how that can turn our economy into a force for change and innovations frontier. So what's the magnitude of this opportunity? I mean, it's incredible, you know? So the question, how might we achieve this tremendous global goal, you know, putting in half global emissions by 2030, that's only a few short years from now, and then go on to win the goal of a net zero emissions and even start tipping into a nature positive economy no later than 2050, while leaving no one behind, while advancing prosperity and well-being for all and reversing nature loss. So just think about this, the magnitude of this change opportunity. We've got a $90 trillion economy. Think every industry that, you know, from finance to manufacturing and agriculture and so on. Think 200 millions and more businesses that encircle the planet. And so many of those are economically larger than nation states. So anyway, with that, I do want to, the 6,000 interviews and so on, I do want to touch on a few of these just to give an example and then come back to our model. I don't know if, you know, one of the most remarkable stories in the world that should be told everywhere is the remarkable reinvention of Orsted. So Orsted, if you understand, Orsted was like, you know, the fossil fuel, like the Exxon in Denmark. And a couple of years ago, and this is dramatic because they do argue that 70% of our carbon impact comes from about 70 or 80 companies. So this story is important in that light. Orsted, you know, was in the fossil fuel business of coal and oil and so on. And then it decided collectively and announced it in front of their shareholders all around the world. They said, we are going to divest from all of that and we're going to become a company that runs entirely on green energy. Our vision is a world that runs entirely on green energy. A couple of years later, they were ranked the #1 sustainable corporation in the world, but it's that reinvention that's so remarkable here. And people said, you know, what's the stock price and market cap going to do? It went up 4 times during that period of time. You know, they were playing the puck where it, you know, like Wayne Gretzky, not where it is today, but where it's going to be. And it's almost as astonishing as, let's say, working with a big tobacco company and they going in front of Wall Street and say, we decided to transform ourselves into a nutritional excellence company. I mean, that kind of model, we need those stories in the world. This is a smaller one. This is a company that some of the students interviewed. It's called Nothing New. And there's nothing new on any part of these gym shoes. They're made from all the ocean plastics and fish nets and so on. And what's interesting in terms of business logic is when you're done with them, you send them back to the company and they give you $20. Now, why would they do that? It's because every time we talk about economies of scale, but now what about economies of cycles in terms of circularity and so on? Toyota, they're pioneering right now in prototyping net positive cities at the base of Mount Fuji. It's called deeply woven cities, and they're working towards cities that give back more clean energy to their surroundings than they use. They're leveraging these new digital and CRISPR and DNA technologies to individualize medicine, to turn all waste into wealth, not just zero emissions mobility, but, you know, mobility. They started talking about mobility that actually purifies the air as it's going, hydroponic farming and so on. So the goals of zero poverty, zero CO2, zero unemployment. This one is an interesting, real interesting one. Let me just check something here. Oops. oops, so um, my battery isn't working right. Huh. Hmm. Sorry, I don't want my connection to go bad here. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think we're good. This one is really interesting. It's being called out by a lot of astute observers, but it's called food out of thin air. And their question was, what if we could make food, you know, like and natural protein 20,000 times more land efficient than it is today? And they're doing that. It's called Solian. It's manufactured in kind of renewable energy facilities and so on. But and what their goal is to propel a future where everyone on Earth can be handsomely fed using only a tiny fraction of the Earth's surface. So lots and lots. Oh, this was one, I did an interview with young people at Tesla in Netherlands. And this was a display center. And the young people were on fire. They were brilliant, came and taught me so much. But then at the end, I said to them, I said, you know, what is it that you do here on the display center? What's your job? And this young person who was so articulate, he said, my job is to electrify the renewable energy age. And I said, wait a second, but you know, you're not hearing my question. What is your job? And he said, no, my job is to electrify the renewable energy age. And he was so filled with joy. And then I said, wait a second, what do you say to your mother is your job? And he said, you're not hearing me. And I tell my mother the same thing. I'm here to electrify the renewable energy age. So we're starting to see the way in which this leads to flourishing, with some of those early stories in hand from our aim to flourish world inquiry into business as a force for good. This was shortly before he passed away. Peter Drucker, the father of management thought, was 90 years old. And he wanted to hear about our work. And so I went and spent 8 hours in his home, and it was a joy. I hope when I get older, I have that kind of curiosity velocity that he had. He was so, I couldn't hardly get a word in edgewise. But as I shared story after story, he said, David, I wrote about it many years ago. Every single social and global issue of our day is a business opportunity in disguise, waiting for the entrepreneurial mind, waiting for the innovation, waiting for the effective management to get things done, investment capacities, and so on. And so that's kind of a spirit that runs throughout the book. Today, we're seeing all of these companies, and you know many of them, beginning to talk not just net zero, but to make the shift towards a world that is flourishing in many different directions, and to, you know, where we've gone from code minimum to going green to net zero. And Paul Pullman in our book talks about and defines what he means by net positive. So we'll come back to some of that. Oh, this was another one that was just shows the imagination and innovation and excitement that comes when we start using our intention, you know, like designers. Bill McDonough said the first signal of design is, what is our intention? What do we intend to create? And so this group in Netherlands, you can look it up, it's called OAT. They went to their designers and said, can you design us a gym shoe that young people are going to love? You know, that we won't need any advertising because of the buzz, that's made in renewable energy facilities and biodegradable materials. And by the way, can you design us something that instead of just less landfill, can you design us something that actually improves our air and improves our planet? And so, you know, it's a small example, but it's true. And they created it. It's called Shoes That Bloom. And when you're done with them, I brought boxes of them home for our young people. And when you're done with them, you plant them in your backyard, and it turns into a flower or a tree. So you can look that one up. So anyway, and then Patagonia, you've heard the recent news of Yvon Chouinard. He was the founder, and he got an ethics award at our school a couple years ago. And he's living those ethics, and his family just sold all their shares, not sold, but turned all of their shares, the biggest shareholder, into a fund that will continue to increase as Patagonia does good, but it gives, it'll give away, he's given away all his money. It's all going to go to the action platforms that they've created. So what's bigger than giving away the money? It's this platform model that they've created. They have a platform where all of their customers and stakeholders can find projects to become part of, environmental causes and so on, and become part of. And so what's emerging is a form of organizational leadership outside of the building that helps empower people, that gives them a platform to live larger lives than they would otherwise. And I'll talk about this outside of the building, as Rosabeth Moss-Cantor calls it. So we also started wondering how, because we're part of the human sciences. There's just been a positive revolution in the human sciences when Marty Seligman a few years ago saw that 98% of the articles in the journals were all on what's wrong with the human being. And so he called for, it's called the positive psychology of human strengths and flourishing. And my whole bookshelf is completely different now. But it helped me begin to put some words to, and my colleagues, some words to, what do we mean by positive institutions? So there was this handbook of, of mental illness with 10,000 technical terms for what's wrong with the human being. And Marty and Dr. Peterson at University of Michigan went out and started, it's a classification of human strengths. It's like an encyclopedia of human strengths. And it comes from a study of all cultures and looks at the strengths of courage, the strengths of humanity, the strengths of wisdom, and then within each of those categories. And it's an amazing book on itself. But I started thinking about, how do we tie this together with the strategy and sustainability work in business that's happening? And what we've done is come up with my colleague Lindsay Gotwin and I, and then in the book with Audrey, we've defined, come up with an externally facing kind of definition here, that positive institutions are organizations and structured practices in a culture or society that serve to elevate and develop our highest human strengths, like wisdom, courage, creativity, transcendence, love of beauty, develop our highest human strengths, combine and magnify those strengths like we do in the Appreciative Inquiry Summits, where we bring stakeholders from every level and inside a system and outside a system, magnify those strengths, but ultimately refract our highest human strengths outward in world benefiting ways, leading ultimately to a world of full spectrum flourishing. And so with that, it started to lead to a thought experiment as we looked at all these stories and in the book. And we started thinking, what if we start talking about institutions as the client of organization development? That's the field I'm in. What if we stop talking about institutions as the client, but now rather that they are the change agents? Instead of us coming in as change champions, what if we stop talking about institutions as the client, but now they're the change agents? Well, here, what we're talking about here is imagine more than 250 millions of organizations and businesses as human augmentation platforms for change. All of a sudden now we can start talking about systemic change. And I like this metaphor of human augmentation that's often used when we talk about the combination of artificial intelligence and the human mind. it's an augmentation of our human capacities. It's often talked about in mechanical terms, like, with a robotic suit, you can lift a whole grand piano with that kind of robotics and so on. So we're talking about institutions now as being augmenting agents, that human augmentation platforms. Um, so one more little bit on this as we start to weave this external view of the positive institution. I want to do a shout out for Chris Laszlo, one of my great colleagues. He did a book a couple years ago with many research fellows at our center, and it's a Stanford University Press book, and it's called Flourishing Enterprise. And the quest in the book, or the observation, was lots of companies who have launched big, bold efforts, to become net zero or sustainable companies, that somehow the word sustainability might have been wrong. It's like it meant less carbon, less impact, less energy, less waste. And they started thinking, when they saw a lot of companies who started out strong and then they got weaker, and began to, like, get incremental returns, they said, no, we got to shift the whole field. John Ehrenfeld and others said that the word needs to be about flourishing, flourishing lives, and that's the aim. We don't want, like, at a wedding with our partner or marriage partner, or what we don't say in the wedding vows, by the way, I hope our relationship is sustainable. No, we want something higher. And so they argued that to really make breakthroughs over time, that it required a new consciousness of interdependence, a consciousness of connectedness, a spiritual consciousness, if you will. And so they created a model that said, what we got to start with is the flourishing human being, where we are flourishing with all of our human capabilities, wisdom, courage, and so on. And so they introduce a lot of reflective practices, meditation, and journals, and others. And the argument there is, as our leaders develop in consciousness, then the enterprise will become more sustainable, with high engagement, sustainable value, build a strong culture and identity, and then ultimately work towards a world of prosperity and flourishing ecosystems. And Chris wrote a chapter in our book as well about this, and I contributed a chapter to his book, and I started saying, wait a second, what also, if we reverse this sensible sequence, what would that mean? And I realized that systems, you can start at any part of a system because everything is connected. And something that we started finding, I think it's the biggest discovery in my career that gives me hope. So let's say, the logic there is flourishing individuals to flourishing enterprise to flourishing world. So let's say a company is starting its journey towards beyond sustainability. And so, you would think it goes from left to right. But one of the things, so this left to right kind of model, and that what we were seeing was that you could start at another level. And I think Carl Weick said we get into trouble when we forget to think in circles. And if we're talking about flourishing, the field of positive psychology has defined that as lots and lots of positive emotion like hope, P, PERMA, positive emotion like hope, inspiration, joy, E, engagement of who we really are, R, high quality relationships, M, a life of meaning is part of the flourishing dynamic, and then A is accomplishment. And what we were seeing in a number of the companies that we were doing research with was that it might be easier than you think, that once Once that normal enterprise brought everybody in the system together to create its framework for a better world, all of a sudden, working on a flourishing world, we saw another direction to this whole thing, where just jumping into a view of the external world leads to flourishing individuals. They come alive as they're working out there, the inside, and then the flourishing enterprise on the inside, and so on. And it's ongoing. So the idea was that that if you wanted, we had a company call us from Detroit, an auto company, and they said, we have no trust. People are not engaged. They don't, the people, are not like thinking like with their hearts and minds, and the engagement scores are terrible. And they said, can you come in and do some team building and help us gain trust again across divisions and so on? And our answer was, don't focus on the inside of the company. Start bringing everybody together to think about the long-term contribution you're going to make to society. And so there's a lot of, my colleague Ron Fry and I called this in a journal article, mirror flourishing. And it's almost like the mirror neuron concept. When you see a tennis player, for example, making a brilliant tennis shot, the same parts of your brain light up as if you were actually doing it yourself. And that's why I think this mirror flourishing is so powerful. We define it as the concrescent, that means growing together, flourishing or growing together, that happens naturally and reciprocally to us when we actively engage or witness the acts that help nature flourish, that help others flourish, or the world as a whole to flourish. And it's the most powerful finding. We've done appreciative inquiry summits on almost every kind of topic imaginable. But the one that brings the inside of the organization to life, to collaboration, to new frontiers of innovation is when they're crafting their agenda for the external impact they're going to have. So there's lots of studies on this. This is Stephen Post, Why Good Things Happen to Good People. 700 studies of selfless love and finding meaning and so on. And so you might ask a little bit about how do we go about doing this? Lindsay Gotwin and I created a playbook to go along with the business of building a better world. And I'll give you an email if you want to get a copy of that. It's in a PDF form. But it's a new playbook that brings the best of all we've done and the lessons throughout the book to bring people together in large group ways. It follows the Appreciative Inquiry Summit design process, coming together to propel our future, our Better Business, Better World Summit. There's companies that do this on an annual basis and move from discovery to dream to co-design to developing a plan for deployment and so on. I can't go into the method that too much, but just to argue that it's the co-creation part. Like if we're working with a trucking company, to have the dock workers, the truck drivers, the senior leaders, the CEOs, the customers in the room, the community in the room, and so on. It's bringing together whole systems for a 3-day kind of process. Clark Industries in Chicago, they were in a toxic chemical business of vector control, mosquito control, and so on. And after one of their summits, and they launched a program called Project Greater Purpose. But again, it just brought the company to life. They became an industry leader in that toxic industry, created new products where they won the presidential award in green chemistry. There's no toxicity. Everything's organic now in there. And now they're convening whole industries their whole industry to look at the sustainability agenda and framework. It's an amazing company. So part of the logic with the whole system in the room designing it, as opposed to having some expert come in and do it, is it engages all the people. And, you know, you don't fear people whose story you know. We're so fearful to bring people together in an unstructured way, you know, where it's open mic time all the time. But we're finding that as we do it together and work towards a world and our own agenda for a world of flourishing, that's when the best in human beings comes out. We don't know why that is, why wholeness would bring out the best, but somehow it does. And so in our process here, in the book, there's a model where we're putting together that whole kind of business logic for doing good and doing well. You can call it sustainable value, you call it corporate shared value, as Michael Porter calls it, where it follows that Peter Drucker notion that every single global issue is a business opportunity with the right imagination and mind. And we work with groups to, at the bottom level, to take on radical transparency as an advantage, disruptive circularity, like those shoes, nothing new, from efficiencies of scale to efficiencies of circularity, positive revolution in products like OAT, you know, shoes that bloom. And then the entrepreneurial humanocracy, where we're building organizations where people are partners, where it's open book management, where people are treated as full partners. And then looking at the intangibles value, like 80% of a company's value today is intangibles. It's their brand promise, it's their intellectual property, and so on. But the part of the model that I'm most excited about right now is this moving outside of the building, where, you know, yeah, there's competitive excellence and outperformance through the inside of the company's work. But all of a sudden, when we say, if institutions are no longer our clients, but they are the change agents, then what are their interventions? What are their interventions that they're doing? And it all revolves around sources of collaborative advantage on the lower level, enhancing and elevating human lives. For example, Patagonia's platform to invite hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers to be change agents in the world. They are giving a gift to those people. They're helping them live lives of more meaning and purpose, where individuals can play larger than they are through that platform. Strategic convening. One of the curious things that's happened in our work is that once a company does and learns how to bring whole systems together, all of a sudden they're starting to bring whole systems together outside of themselves. So National Grid, for example, became a leader in strategic convening. Sherry Warren took what they did their internal development of a framework for net positive and so on. And then they started saying, what if we took some of our, they're in the utilities business, what if we took some of our advertising budget that's often just neglected and take that and bring whole cities together? So interestingly, they brought the city of Worcester together to build a green city. They brought the whole Albany region, and they ultimately did a big summit with the governor of the state and all the electrical to set the electric energy goals. Next level up is mission economy business mega communities, not communities of individuals, but communities of organizations, mega communities, they call that. And so you've got like the UN Global Compact that we work with. They have 16,000 corporations part of the effort, and all the learning that comes back into their organizations. So anyway, I want to leave a little time, but these are just some examples. Sherry Warren brought National Grid, where they are now convening whole cities, whole states. So this is Jib Ellison next to her. Jib was working with Walmart when they decided we're going to become a company of zero waste, sustainable products, 100% renewable energy. And what they found was that there was only so far they could go with all the supply chains and, thousands, like 70, 80,000 suppliers. And there was only so far they could go. So they started convening whole industries. Like, for example, dairy industry, very, very toxic industry. So they helped, in order to achieve their goals, they had to start convening whole industries to set the frameworks. This is Erin Fitzgerald next to Jib, and she was the one from the dairy industry that led that effort. And now they're doing it with the whole ranching industry and beef and so on. Mayor Jackson, with next to her, Mayor Jackson came to one of the UN Global Compact meetings and saw how important this could be for the whole city to create a flourishing connectivity across silos and so on. And so one of the catalytic firms was Fairmont Minerals. They had won the best, corporate citizen award in the United States after doing their work with the appreciative inquiry work. And then they did 10 years of building a green city on a blue lake. Michelle Hunt covered that. Dream Makers Dream Makers was her book, if you want to take a look at that. And then last week, with Hala Tomas Titor and the B team is a mega community of business leaders and so on in Europe. And we just did with them the European Energy Earthshot Summit. It was incredibly complex in terms of energy issues and geostrategic relationships. But again, it had the business leader said, with the Ukraine crisis, with Russia's invasion, all the inflation that's happening, let's use these appreciative inquiry tools and business as a force for good in that realm. So that was all done online. The Europe's Energy Earthshot, just and inclusive, accelerated and affordable and safe and secure. It was so exciting to see again how the best in people comes out when we're in that co-creation mode and every part of society is together. Anyway, let me just open it up for, you might have some questions or curiosities. I hope that this, little quick overview of some of the book raises your interest. But I'd love if there's a couple questions, Suzanne, to just get into some conversation. Thank you all. And I think you can just unmute.
I have a question.
Yeah. Yep. And your name?
Francisco Valle.
Okay. Hello, Francisco.
How are you? Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Very insightful presentation. By the way, I'm using your book as a gift now. I got the opportunity to read it, and now I'll give it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. My question is this. Peter Drucker used to say that great leaders can see the future that has already happened.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about here today is something now that is not something, right, that people cannot see yet in general. It's something, as you said, right, it's going evolving now, it's very visible. But what is preventing many leaders or large corporations to really embrace it? They will have to embrace it now because the SEC is going to enforce it, just like next year probably. Yeah. But what is preventing great leaders to do that, or leaders of big companies to embrace this?
Yeah, I just have to say, I think, first of all, we just are not hearing enough of these stories. The stories are out there by the thousands and thousands. Our negative media is about 10 to 1 negative for every one story of courage and boldness and creative leaps and so on. There's 10 other articles in our negative media. And so we're painting a picture, and also with the social media so much, we're painting a picture of our world and our future with so many colors that are missing. And so part of our commitment is to help raise the profile of these stories again. And the students who are doing these interviews come back just so alive with excitement and in our aim to flourish process. They see that management can be a noble profession. But to answer your question, I think people, as they're not seeing it, they're leaving a lot on the table. It's the most powerful way to bring your company to life on the inside by not focusing on the inside, but coming collectively together to create a full world of full spectrum flourishing. And I define that as a world where all economies and organizations can excel, all people can thrive, and nature can flourish, not just now, but across the generation. And the most important thing that I do that helps bring out this and CEOs and others is I have them talk to other CEOs. There are just so many amazing people. Paul Pullman, for example, is one of the world's treasures in terms of a statesperson and helping to lead the way. But that's what I've found. So thank you for that question. Is there another curiosity or question?
Hello, David. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, my name is Tessie. I'm calling in from London, England. And my
Okay.
question, and thanks for a very, very brilliant presentation and for building on the appreciative inquiry and moving on. My question's around collective trauma. I mean, I'm a brown woman, and the traumas that exist internally and externally, and a collective system where people that are Black and brown can flourish as well within this. I'm very, very open to hearing your say on this because of the inequalities and the equities that happen. I'm very open to hearing your thoughts.
Yeah. So let me just recommend another article. We had a whole special issue of the Organization Development Review just come out. And by the way, I'll put, there's my email, and you could write if you want the playbook or that new. But there is an article by Yvonne Gilpin-Jackson that talks exactly about this trauma moment and how we need to come together to, in our trauma, and how we need to come together in a way that unleashes action and collective action and understanding between people. So I know it's a huge, huge question, the mental stress and burnout and rejections and so on. We're living in a world where, there's a fraying of our social bond. And so I'm looking to like the field of positive psychology of human strengths and flourishing. One person's work that I think deserves to be in every family's bookshelf is Barbara Fredrickson, and she's studying the healing processes that happen through high quality relationships and inclusion and social justice. So anyway, it's a big question, and it's incredibly important. And that's also why I like that definition of hope, that it's a verb with its sleeves rolled up.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, it's Jim Hemsath in Alaska.
Yes, Jim.
Not to be negative, but it is dark and cold. It's midterm time, obviously, from an election perspective.
Right.
Politics has taken such a front stage in pretty much sucking the positivity out of the world. So
Right.
the question becomes, do we ignore politics and move to businesses to make the change? How do we start to influence politics? Because we are not leading with positivity in any sense of the way.
Yeah.
And Ohio is probably, lead there with J.D. Vance winning that Senate seat.
Did he? Okay,
Yes.
I didn't hear it today. So yeah, I think first of all, we do need all the sectors. It's not just a private sector innovation call and so on. We need all three sectors. Mariana Mazzucato's research is really clear on that, and it's not about, you know, handouts or big government, but it's about investments in a common projects and common, you know, mission moments. And she's got a way to help systems and nation states develop their mission maps together. And it's accelerated by bringing all the groups across their silos and so on. But I think my only thought on this is that I think we have an impoverished view of what the next stage of democracy could be. And like Mayor Jackson saw it for the first time when he brought every level, big business, small business, neighborhoods, homeless, you know, scientific institutions, environment, come together to design a green city on a blue lake. And what I started imagining was that maybe there is a next stage to democracy beyond the dialogical, beyond, you know, conversation. And I started thinking about it like where I see such aliveness, like at IDEO, the design studios, when people are coming together to design the new and eclipse the old. I'm hoping that someday we start thinking about a design democracy where we're not just in focus groups with citizens, and we're not, you know, and leaving the voice of the youth out, leaving the voice of the workers out. I mean, a new kind of democratic process in cities and other places where the youth are at the decision-making table, at the inner circle of strategy, where the workers are at the decision-making table, at the inner circle of strategic point of view. And I think that people are tired of coming together in big, you know, town hall meetings or community dialogues and just getting to the point of, boy, we had a good dialogue, but what are we going to do? They want to come together to create it and create it collectively. And so I'm thinking there might be a next stage to democracy. I'll call it design democracy. I had a chance to interview former President Jimmy Carter at one point, and I said, President Carter, you've had ups and downs and twists and turns and high points and low points in your career. Can you tell me the high point moment? And he said, David, that's easy. It was post-presidency. And it's when we built the first Habitat for Humanity home, the very first Habitat for Humanity home. And we're standing in a circle and we're saying our prayers of thanks. And we've crossed every class boundary in our society. We've crossed every racial boundary in our society. But more than that, and then he pointed to where the house was, but more than that, you could see the visible evidence of our work together. I think that there might be something that we need to explore in terms of a genuine kind of design democracy. Anyway, I know our time is up here. Let me just leave you with three things that I'd like to just emphasize. The first is that I think the business of changing organizations, who will in turn become the change agents for a better world out there, is the most potent force I've ever seen for elevating the human flourishing and well-being on the inside. It's paradoxical, but it's almost like the harder we try to focus on the inside, it's like trying to go to sleep, you know. The harder you try, the less but when you're starting to think in purposes that are greater than yourselves, that's when the life happens in the organization. The second is that just this is our field's earthshot moment, and failure is not an option. When I looked into the eyes of my 3 grandchildren that were born during the writing of the book, failure isn't an option. We just, you know, and so imagine 200 millions and more workplaces as platforms for positive change and earthshot success. This can be a watershed moment, I think, in the next great episode in business history. And then the generations are counting on us. As Jesper Broden and Hala said in our foreword, history does have its eyes on us. And how might we catalyze or create a spirit of our times that latches on to this Earthshot agenda in ways that do create the excitement and the innovation and so on, where we turn from a culture of learned helplessness, despair, the fraying of our social bonds, and literally experience this next couple decades as an electrifying mission economy. That's the question I'm focused on right now. Anyway, thank you all for joining. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I'm happy to send you more articles and the playbook for the business of building a better world. And let's keep in touch and share learnings over the next, several years. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Fantastic.
Congratulations,
Muchas gracias.
fantastic.
Yeah. Muchas gracias. Hasta la vista.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So-
Fantastic, David. All the best.
Thank
Oh,
you.
very
Good
great.
to see you all. Let's
times.
stay in touch.
Good to see you. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We'll talk soon.
Keep
Thank you.
shining.
There's George. How are you, George?
Thank you, David. Wonderful. Loved it. Loved it.
Amazing.
Good to
Loved
see you,
it.
Paula.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. RC. Thank
Thanks
you
a
for
lot,
joining,
David.
RC.
Yeah. Keep shining.
And there's Megan. Yep, great.
David, how are you? Good
Yeah.
job.
And let me just thank Pat Petty for inviting this and the whole MPOD program, the Masters in Positive Organization Development that sponsors this series.
Fantastic.
And David, I gave everyone in the chat the Fowler Center email address to email for a playbook. So I'll be sending
Awesome,
those out
awesome.
after the session.
Yeah, thank you, Megan.
Yeah,
Thanks for
absolutely.
that, Megan. Thank you again, David. It was wonderful. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
David,
Thanks,
I did include, it's Jane, I did include my email if anybody wants to participate in our survey that we're launching next week to understand how employees benefit when their company's engaged in good.
Oh, that's great. Jane, yeah, Jane's dissertation is all on that mirror flourishing dynamic. Thank you for that, Jane.
Yeah. And so please do let me know if you want to receive the findings. We'll be getting those soon. And even if you want to participate. So my email's in the chat, janeanday@gmail.com.
Thanks. Thank
Yeah.
you,
It's a fun project.
Jane.
David, this is Pat Petty.
Hi,
How are
Pat.
you?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that everyone knows that your session today is going to be available on our website.
Okay.
Recording of it, so they will be able to share it with others and review it if
Okay.
they'd like to watch again. And I will be sending the link out to the registration site or to the registration list.
Thank you, Pat, for inviting me to do this.
Oh, thank you, David. Great session. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay. Be well, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.